And, and for the rest, why don't you go ahead and take your Bibles and turn to the book of Romans, chapter 14. Romans, chapter 14. The title of the message is Powerful versus Unempowered. We'll be looking at verses 1 through 13, although the section in its entirety really goes through chapter 15, verse 13, and we'll be commenting on some of that as well. But the main argument here is in chapter 14, verses 1 through 13, that we'll be looking at momentarily as we continue our series, Reading Romans Backwards, which is actually inspired by Scott McKnight in a book that was just released a few months ago, justifying why we should start at the end of Romans if we're going to preach through Romans, because really the heart and the crux of the message is chapters 12 through 16. We also talked last week, and I want to recap a little for those that weren't here and for those that have memories like my own that are a little bit challenged, that Romans is a book about power and privilege. And Paul's gospel deconstructs power and privilege. Paul's lived theology turns power and privilege upside down, denying privilege to a certain elite or to a certain group. And he also offers it as a radical alternative to the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, which was a big deal in Paul's day. Everyone was talking about the Pax Romana, especially the Romans. The Romans believed that they could bring peace to the world, and all they had to do was subdue it and get it under its control. And of course, you know how that worked out. If you were a Roman citizen, things were pretty good for you. But if you weren't, which was most of the world, well, you had a whole lot less rights and a whole lot more taxes, by the way. And so Paul brings the gospel of Jesus Christ, which offers a genuine peace, a peace for the world that's not based on power and privilege. So we're looking at Romans chapter 12 through 16 to begin in the first part of this series. And this is a lived theology. How do you live out your faith as a Christian within Christian community and within the world at large? And then there's chapters 1 through 11, which is really written to prop up this lived theology. So it's really important, but it really is the basis for what comes in chapters 12 through 16. And so because we're going to move through this slowly, by the time we got through chapter 1 and 11, we'd kind of probably miss the emphasis. And so we're going to start with chapters 12 through 16. We did chapter 16 last week. We're in chapter 14. We'll jump around a little bit, but we'll be in chapters 12 through 16 to begin. What Paul had in focus was a lack of praxis, a lack of living out our faith in practical, tangible ways. It was all about head knowledge. Right? What was the right theology and doctrine, and who had it right and who had it wrong? Of course, that's not been our experience, of course. All of our churches in Lake County believe exactly the same way. In fact, if you went to their churches this morning, they would have had the same music. Right. I think we can understand. Thankfully, there's been a lot of breakdown, and there's a lot of interdenominational backgrounds represented among us today. It's not as big of a deal. Although, as we see our society dividing, the church is also kind of dividing along those lines as well, which we have to be aware of and practice against. To live together, unity within diversity. That's what we were talking about last week. And unity does not mean uniformity. It does not mean that we think exactly the same on everything. But it does mean that there's a commonality that we share. And that commonality is Jesus Christ, that He is Lord. The letter to the Romans is written to house churches in Rome. And as we mentioned last week, it was taken by Phoebe, a deacon in the church of Cenchrea, which is over here by Corinth, where that star is. And she probably traveled by boat, sailing through. There's a pass right through here and up into Rome. And it is addressing differences that have arisen between these house churches. Some of the differences are between Jews and Gentiles, but some of the differences are just between the different house churches, because the churches were about 25 to 40 people. They gathered in people's houses, and anytime you are separate in gathering, differences are going to arise. Heck, differences arise when we gather together in the same building, right? And Paul is addressing these differences and saying, you know, there are some things that are essential and there are some things that are not. And sometimes that's difficult to discern. So lean on the side of grace. I heard someone say before, kill them all and let God sort them out. But you know, the Christian perspective is love them all and let God sort them out. Amen? That's a little different than the world thinks. So we're looking at unity in the midst of diversity. The issue that Paul addresses today may seem pretty petty to us, but I imagine that most arguments seem pretty petty if you allow enough time to pass. Or sometimes some arguments that you're in sound real petty once you share them with someone else. And you hear yourself and you're like, you know, that does seem pretty immature and small, but, you know. Here's some pictures of a city in Rome. So you can't see it real well, but you can see the congestedness of this city. So this is the Tiber River that flowed through it. You see some large structures like this, Circus Maximus. This is where they had the chariot races and all that kind of stuff. It was huge. We have some remnants of some of these things. Go back one yet. And here's a little important note. If I had a trivia question today, it would be, what is the difference between a theater and an amphitheater? Somewhat, but in the first century, the main difference was actually this. So we have a theater right here. You see it's a half circle? Most of the seating is outdoors. It did have some coverings, and then there was a stage right here that was covered. And now here's an amphitheater. It's round, and it's all in the open, and the stage is everything that happens in the center. So that's the big difference between a theater and an amphitheater. Just in case you're ever at an archaeological site, maybe, who knows, March of 2021, and you're in Israel, and you are asked, what is the difference between a theater and an amphitheater? Or is this a theater or an amphitheater? Then you'll know the answer. Go ahead, next slide. All right, so here's some remains of one of the main streets in Rome. And this is what you'd see if you went there to visit today. And you can actually see some of the old structures and pillars still in place. And of course, these are the bottoms of some pillars or where statues stood and some of the actual original road from the first century of Paul's time. Next slide. This is what this same place would have looked like in Paul's time and the Romans who were there. Pretty impressive for 2,000 years ago, isn't it? This is pretty much the center of the world in the first century AD. This is where the emperor lives, and this is a city of cities. Pretty amazing. Let's go ahead and read chapter 14, verses 1 through 13. Accept him whose faith is weak, without passing judgment on disputable matters. One man's faith allows him to eat everything, but another man, whose faith is weak, eats only vegetables. The man who eats everything must not look down on him who does not. And the man who does not eat everything must not condemn the man who does, for God has accepted him. Who are you to judge someone else's servant? To his own master he stands or falls, and he will stand, for the Lord is able to make him stand. One man considers one day more sacred than another. Another man considers every day alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. He who regards one day as special does so to the Lord. He who eats meat eats to the Lord, for he gives thanks to God. And he who abstains does so to the Lord and gives thanks to God. For none of us lives to himself alone, and none of us dies to himself alone. If we live to the Lord, and if we die to the Lord. So whether we live or die, we belong to the Lord. For this very reason, Christ died and returned to life so that he might be the Lord of both the dead and the living. You then, why do you judge your brother? Or why do you look down on your brother? For we will all stand before God's judgment seat. It is written, as surely as I live, says the Lord, every knee will bow before me, every tongue will confess to God. So then, each of us will give an account of himself to God. Therefore, let us stop passing judgment on one another. The word of the Lord. This is actually pretty refreshing, isn't it? It's pretty refreshing. First point is we're all working it out. We're all working it out. There are two big issues that Paul addresses in this, maybe small issues, but big issues for them for that time, big enough to cause some division between them, and for some to say, I'm really following the Lord and you're not, and the other going, no, I am, you're not. And that is concerning meals and special days. The picture that you see was actually discovered in an archaeological dig, and it's a picture of some Gentiles around a triclinium table reclining, and what you see is a boar's head on a platter, and you can also see a servant coming out to serve more of the meal. Romans, Gentiles in general, they loved pork. So do I. I love bacon and I love roast and all those kinds of things, and they did too. They thought it was delicious. But remember, we talked about last week, there were some Jewish Christians in the area. In fact, coming back to the area after being expelled by the emperor, but he died and Nero took over, and they're coming back now. They will get expelled again soon, but they're there for now. And there are issues rising about what's appropriate to eat and what's not. And it's not just a Jewish issue, but it's a Gentile issue as well. Remember that Jewish folks don't eat certain foods. They don't eat pork, they don't eat shellfish, and other things. They had Old Testament dietary laws that they had to abide by. And those laws were created to set them apart, to make them distinctive from other people in the world. And it reminded them that they were to live differently than the rest of the world, and not to get caught up in the things of the rest of the world. And some of the things that seem petty or strange to us that we don't even get were just to make them remember that you are set apart. Jewish Christians continued to observe this in the early church. They really didn't see anything different. They were still Jewish. They just believed that the Messiah had arrived, that they'd been waiting for. And they also wanted Gentile Christians to observe these laws, these traditions and rituals and regulations. And the Gentiles didn't want to, and Paul told them they didn't have to. So there is some Jewish versus Gentile stuff going on in here. But there's also some Gentile Christians who probably were abstaining from eating meat. And the reason why wasn't because they were trying to follow Jewish law, but because almost all meat that was sold in the markets before it got to the market had been sacrificed to an idol first. It was just the custom of the day. And so some of the Gentiles, knowing this, and not knowing which food had been sacrificed to idols or which had not, and feeling like they didn't want to get caught up in eating anything that had been sacrificed to a false god. In fact, there were a bunch of those numbers were actually buildings to temples to false gods in Rome. There were numerous temples to numerous gods right there in that city. And much of the meat was sacrificed. Even the Jews, when they sacrificed an animal, a lot of it was eaten. They offered the sacrifice, they'd leave a small portion, burn up a small portion, but they would eat the rest. Or the priest would eat a lot of it. So they said, well, it doesn't seem right for us to eat meat that's been sacrificed to idols. Probably we'd wrestle too, if that was going on. But then there were others that said, it's just food. It's just meat. Paul was actually one of these. He said, I don't believe in idols. I don't even think they exist. This is just food. So if I'm thankful for it, then I can eat it. Because I don't believe in those idols anyway. To me, they don't even exist. This is something God made. I'm going to reclaim it. You can say amen to that too, right? God made it. It's good. Who cares what someone else does? You know, that's what David was saying when he was dancing, right? There's some dancing that's just inappropriate. But that doesn't mean all dancing is inappropriate. I was at a ministry in New Hampshire, and the director was dancing with his wife in his house. And one of the guys was stoking. Everything was run by wood stoves. And he was stoking, and he happened to go by, and he saw the director dancing with his wife in his living room. And he went and told some of the staff that he's dancing. They dance. It's not right. So thankfully, the director gave him a good tongue lashing about he's gonna dance with his wife whenever and wherever he wants, but why is this guy peeking into his windows? Right? We don't have to throw everything out just because some people misuse it. And so Paul is saying it's okay. In fact, he even describes those who abstain as weaker. And he's not trying to put them down in any way. What he's saying is that, well, you're not fully relying on the grace of Christ. I don't think you fully get it, but that's okay. Be where you are as you need for right now. I trust your life to God. Some, in verse 5, were saying that some days were more sacred than others. Jewish people observed the Sabbath, of course, but other holy days. Do you know that's where our word holiday comes from? It's holy days. Holidays. You can hear it, right? And we might think, well, who cares if one person recognizes one day? But I'll tell you, we deal with this issue. How many people you know get mad when someone says happy holidays instead of Merry Christmas? Right? We're like, no, it's Merry Christmas. We get petty too. Man, if somebody wants to say happy holy days to you, let them say it. If you prefer to say Merry Christmas like I do, say Merry Christmas. We don't have to get into an argument about it. It's okay. Maybe they don't even know they're saying happy holy days. Right? But you know, yeah, these are holy days. And it's okay. We don't have to defend the faith. That's what Paul's saying. We have to live it. And let living it be the example and the testimony to the world. We have to stop trying to get other people to live it our way. Our life with Christ is a process, and it's not a one-size-fits-all process. The path to God is not a straight course. One of the best lessons I learned while I was in Israel is when we were by this open field, and there was a shepherd, and he was guiding his sheep, and George de Young from Holland, Michigan, said, "Those are paths of righteousness." Go ahead to the next slide. You see them? Those are paths of righteousness. I never even knew that it referred to an actual thing. So yeah, when they talk about paths of righteousness in the Bible, this is what they're talking about. That's what the shepherds call them. That's what everyone in the area, paths of righteousness. He said, what do you notice about them? And someone who was brighter than me, what's that? They're all over the place. There's more than one. He said, there's more than one path. He said, and we actually had sheep on them, and I think those little dots might be sheep, I don't know. And they were all on different paths. And he said, what can you learn from that? That maybe you're someplace on a different path than someone else, but they're doing okay. He says, because what do all the paths have in common? They're all going the same, they're all following the shepherd. But imagine if a sheep was on this path going, "Hey, buddy, get over onto this path. You're on the wrong path." And the other sheep's going, "I see the shepherd too." Now we're not saying that, anything goes, but we're saying sometimes we can be on a different path, but still following God. That means we can think a little differently on different theological matters. We can practice a little differently. Even today, some consider one day more special than another. Some don't celebrate birthdays because they think only Jesus should be celebrated. Let them do that if that's what they want to do, and let us celebrate birthdays if we want to, because we're gonna. It's okay. We will find ourselves in different places at different times. And where we end up further down the road isn't necessarily where everyone should end up at that point. I remember a new Christian. I had just graduated from that ministry in New Hampshire, and I came back. Carla and I were dating, and she said, "Oh, I want you to meet some of my friends. They're away. They live at college in Chicago. They were going to Trinity Evangelical College, and good Christian school, good Christian folk." So I went out to Chicago with her, and we hung out with the friends, and then they said, "Hey, let's go out tonight. Why don't we go to this bar that I know of?" And I was so mad. Go to a bar? No way. And I made it a really bad weekend. I'll tell you, they didn't go to that bar with me, that's for sure. And I was pretty new, green behind the ears, pretty legalistic. It's really strange because I love craft beer now, And, but that's where I was at. And I thought everyone else had to be right where I was at if they were going to be on the right path. So isn't it ironic that that's not even where I'm at, but I sure ruined our weekend? And I think I'm better now, but God shows me things to show that I'm still not there. So a couple of months ago, I was at Grand Rapids Theological Seminary and just stopping in and doing some stuff because my spiritual director lives right by there. So sometimes if I get in early, I'll stop there and I'll work on sermon prep or read or whatever. And I just like being back in those old grounds, you know. So a class broke for break, and I could hear them talking all about predestination in the hallways. You know, well, I think this and I think that, and this is how it works. And I thought, poor fools, you know, such petty issues. Why are they wasting their time on that? And then all of a sudden I was convicted. And I thought, look at you. You still think you're better. You know, this is exactly what they should be talking about. These are the issues they should be. That's exactly what I was doing in the same classrooms. Why would I think that I'm better than them? This is where they belong. This is what they should be doing. This is what they're going to work through. And it's good and it's right. Just because some odd years later, I'm not as interested in that anymore. I think I'm better. We all are in process. And just because someone's doing it differently doesn't mean it's wrong. They're right where they should be. Why? How do we know that? Because it says in the scripture, God has them. And He will make them stand. This doesn't mean that anything goes. I think there's plenty of things we can agree on. How many people here agree that you shouldn't drink and drive? Right? I think there's plenty of things that we can agree on. I'm sure that you agree that you shouldn't cheat on your spouse. Right? I mean, it's not like anything goes. I think as Christians, we agree that in order to be a Christian and to hold to the faith of the apostles, you need to believe that Jesus Christ is God incarnate. That He lived a sinless life. That He died for our sins. That He was resurrected again from the dead. And that it's through Him that salvation comes. I think we can all agree on that. I think if you went to the Lutheran church, they'd agree with that. If you went to the Catholic church, they'd raise their hands and agree with that. That's our commonality. But we have to be careful when it comes to our definition of salvation, because I thought it included not going to a bar. And these folks that want to go to the bar, they don't overdrink. Not at all. So what is your definition of salvation? Does it look particularly just like you think it should? And if someone's not on track, then they're off track. Which is true, they probably are off track. They're on a different path, but following the shepherd. We need to remember that each of us stands before God. Verse 4, who are you to judge someone else's servant? To his own master he stands or falls. That means not to you or me. And then listen to this, and he will stand, for the Lord is able to make him stand. You know, we all love the first part of this verse about not judging, although we personally fail at it all the time, just like I gave you some examples of my own failure. But I like it when it applies to other people not judging me. You know what I mean? It's a little harder for me to give grace to others and not judge them. But we probably haven't really noticed the second half of the verse very much. To his own master he stands or falls, and he will stand. For the Lord is able to make him stand. You know, we judge others, and usually our reasoning behind it is because we're concerned that they might miss the mark. So we point it out, and we try to convince them that they're wrong so that they can do it our way, the right way. Why? So that they can stand tall like us. When you think of it that way, it kind of makes you laugh, right? But here, God assures us He's got them. Not only can they stand, but it says He will make them stand. That's a promise. He will make them stand. That the other person belongs to Him, not us. And He's got this. Right? It's like God is saying, pushing us, hey, I got this one. I got that one too. It's okay. I will make them stand. You don't have to. He will bring about their salvation in His way, in His time. And so we're told to not judge others. And I always like to remind you that there are two kinds of judgments. There is a condemning judgment, which is what we're talking about here. The Greek word is krino. And then there's a discerning judgment. And there's a difference. We're not called not to discern. We're not called not to notice. But we're called to not condemn, not to crush someone and walk away saying, I spoke the truth. It's on his hands now. Krino means to sit in judgment on someone or something, playing the part of God in rendering a person's condemnation. Now, discerning, that's a whole different form of judgment. Teachers have to do this all the time. Counselors have to do this. It's not like they don't notice something's wrong or there's some bad behavior or self-destructive behavior. But they have to enter into it in such a way that they're able to enable the person to see it and to choose something that's more productive, that's healthier, that's better for everyone. And what they're doing is helping someone by an encouraging way, by telling them, I love you just the way you are, just like Jesus loves us, but I love you too much to leave you that way. And that is a very different kind of judgment. It's a kind of judgment that's not looking down upon, but that's actually believing the very best about another person. Liberates them. It doesn't rub their nose in it. Verse 13, therefore, let us stop passing judgment on one another. So the therefore means all of this to say, here's the main point. Stop passing judgment on one another. Which brings us to our final point, live and let live. You know, not everything is good or bad. Some people think that, well, this is perfection, and therefore anything that's not just this is short of perfection. And I believe that perfection comes in many forms. God is always changing the way he does things, and he works with people in different ways, and yet each way he works with them is perfect, although it's different. Perfection can come in many forms. Some things are just different because we're all different. Verse 5 and following says, one man considers one day more sacred than another. Another man considers every day alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. He who regards one day as special does so to the Lord. He who eats meat eats it to the Lord, for he gives thanks to God. And he who abstains, well, that one does it to the Lord as well and gives thanks to God. It's just different. Neither of these people are wrong, just different. Paul describes one group as a little bit weaker in their faith, and he's not doing it to be disparaging. But you know what's really interesting? Do you know who the weaker ones are? The more legalistic ones in this case. The ones who have more laws and rules and traditions that they think you have to abide by. Isn't that strange? Because I bet those people thought it just the opposite. And my guess is, if we're real honest with ourselves, we always think of ourselves as the stronger one when we think we're right about something. Which is funny because Paul will turn everything upside down and pretty much say, so if you think you're the stronger one, well, then you're the one who needs to give more grace to the weaker one. And what's funny is that we'll each think that we're stronger, and we'll end up having to give more grace to each other. So it works out. But there's another meaning to stronger and weaker, and it's more than just mature versus immature. The whole argument continues through 15:13. 15:1 says, we who are strong ought to bear with the failings of the weak and not to please ourselves. Now, strong and weak in the Greek are the same word actually, with a slight difference. Strong is dunatoi, and weak is adunatoi. It's kind of like the difference between a theist and an atheist. A theist is someone who believes in God, wherein put an A in front of it, and it negates it, right? Atheist, someone who doesn't believe in God. We have all kinds of words that do that. Same is what these are the words that Paul is using. There's the dunatoi and there's the adunatoi. And I like the way the CEB version translates it because I think it captures another dynamic of this that Paul's really getting at. It reads, we who are powerful, dunatoi, need to be patient with the adunatoi, the weakness of those who don't have power. Remember, we talked about the whole book of Romans is about power and privilege. And it's about how, in the Christian community, we break that down. Scott McKnight says, and it'll be on the screen, he says, Paul contrasts the dunatoi and the adunatoi, the powerful versus the unempowered. Dunatoi and adunatoi are status terms in the Roman world. That's important to know, where everything was status. Notice it is the strong who are told to welcome the weak. Why? Power and privilege and status and location are on their side. It is the weak who need to be welcomed. The act of the strong welcoming the weak is a Christoform, or a Christ-like act of crossing boundaries and turning no status into in Christ status. That means those who didn't have power, those who didn't have status, when they come to church, guess what? The slave is equal. The woman has a place. It is to say, because we are strong and have privilege and power, we will not broker our power to divide the faith community, but we will disempower ourselves to empower each sibling at the table and so live out the gospel of Christ. Hear that? Live out. This is what Christianity in practice looks like. Sometimes we haven't always practiced it well. The ones who have power are the majority Gentiles in Rome. And they, because they had power, because they had privilege, because they were running things, Paul is saying, you have this power, now you need to let it go and make space for the Jewish Christians that are coming in who are more legalistic. You don't have to do things their way, but you have to let them do things their way, because that's where they're at. Just because you're the majority doesn't mean that you get to tell them how to live and how to be a Christian here. Bear with them. Be patient with their legalistic tendencies, is what Paul is saying. Why? Because the Gentiles were the majority in Rome. They held the power. Therefore, they needed to be the ones who were willing to make space. Guess what Paul tells the Jews living in Jerusalem? He tells them to make space for the Gentiles who don't hold to their traditions and observances, which all the Jewish Christians, the majority in Jerusalem, were holding to. It's just the opposite. Why does he change it around for the Jews in Jerusalem? Because the Jews in Jerusalem are the more powerful there, in that place. So they need to make space for the differences of the Gentiles who are now joining them. And so the point is, we need to make space for one another. And anytime we think our argument is stronger, that we're in the right, well, that means we think the other one is weaker. And guess what the Bible tells us to do with the weaker? Give them grace. Be patient with them. Doesn't mean you have to do everything their way, but it does mean that you have to make a place for them at the table and love them and be patient and gracious with them. And so, those of us who consider ourselves strong need to be all the more willing to be patient. Amen? This is what Christian community is supposed to look like. Let's pray. Father, we give you thanks for this witness. Lord, I'm sorry and almost embarrassed for the Romans having to go through this and having it written down. But I guess I shouldn't be, since we need to learn from it. We have our own petty issues and our own differences. And we thank you that in Christ we see an example of the strong becoming weak in order to be able to be with the weak and let them to be with you. Thank you that Christ emptied himself and became like us, and he made a place at the table for us. Help us to be more like your Son, starting in this community in our lives as an example to all those around us. By your grace, help us to give grace to one another. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.